Dr. Cheryl Hart, awesome to be with you today. Good to see your face.
Good to see you too, Marty.
So I want to, I just want to introduce people to you and to really to get kind of a glimpse of what I have gotten and my partner has gotten in as you're helping firefighters, and just talk a little bit of psychology and dig into boys a little bit. And you have an interesting perspective because you are working primarily or 100% with firefighters?
Nearly 100%.
Nearly 100%. And when was that transition made for you?
6 or 7 years ago.
Okay.
I started, ramping up. Maybe 7. It was several years before COVID started.
Okay. And then we met about 5-ish years ago. We were looking for an MHP, a mental health professional, to that on 2 counts. One that I could go to and ask questions as we're trying to support firefighters, and then also for firefighters to go to. And since then, you are now pretty much booked out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really telling for the firefighter community that, when you're booked out, and that means that there's a lot of firefighters suffering out there.
Mm-hmm. It's really nice that they're now speaking up and saying, hey, I need some help. I'm going to go get it. And so that's why I'm full, I think, because people are willing to speak up and go get the help they need now.
Yeah. And so when I first started doing the peer support program in 13-ish years ago, in a room with a bunch of guys, I begin to speak, and about 5 minutes into it, I've got, these salty guys looking at their watches, and one of them said, "Are we a bunch of fucking pussies?" Yeah. And now those guys are coming to us asking, telling us that their friends' grandmas died, and can we check on them? And so it's really gone, the scope has gotten really broad for, people calling us to really just be intentional friends, and love on them and care for them in those emotional needs. And so we're starting to break down those walls, or have broke down those walls with men's emotions in our workplace. And so anyways, I called you to intervene and help out. And it's been awesome for a number of our guys, and as well as for me and our peer support program. So yeah, very thankful for you. So tell me a little bit about your getting into psychology and into the field that you're in.
It's so weird, and it's almost a full circle kind of story, because I was a freshman in college, and my roommate was involved in this crazy thing called, get this, the peer support program at the University of Florida. And so she had this really big binder. It was 4 inches thick. I mean, they trained the heck out of those peer support kids. And when she wasn't in the room, I'd be going through her binder and being like, oh my God, this stuff is so interesting. And at the time I was studying engineering and pre-med. Like I was going to couldn't decide between being a doctor or an engineer. And I just kept reading this book, and I was like, oh my God, I need to go follow this. And so then I signed up the following year to be a peer supporter at the University of Florida, where I was for the rest of my 5 years there. And then one thing leads to another, and I got my PhD in PsyD. It's a doctoral degree, and now I'm doing this. I'm doing therapy.
Awesome. And so now when you get firefighters that come in, what is so what we do is is the critical incident stress management. Are you getting guys that are coming in solely due to those critical incidents?
I have all kinds of things happening. Okay. So I'm primarily a PTSD. That's what I do. Nearly 100% of my work is PTSD, or someone's had some type of trauma and they have a mental health condition that's either PTSD or in the vicinity of PTSD. And so the way that works, and what we really have recognized over the past number of years is people get PTSD from a single incident that's pretty horrific, right? But what has become crystal clear to the mental health field over the last 20 or more years is that there are people in their professions, such as first responders, who are perpetually exposed to trauma. Like every day it's another trauma. And it's, the worst day of someone's life is just one of 2 or 3 calls for a first responder. So the psychology and psychiatry field recognized the negative impact of that. I don't even know, a couple of versions back in our DSM-5, our DSM, which is our diagnostic manual. It's the book we go by to diagnose things.
Okay.
And so now people come in for a single incident trauma or this cumulative trauma, such as what we're describing here with first responders. So people will come in just kind of just overwhelmed with symptoms, and they can't put their finger on like what happened, what was the final straw. They don't know. They just know they're not feeling good and they can't function anymore. And I see those, which is the cumulative side typically. And then sometimes there's just a really bad call, which is on top of decades of other really bad calls, right? And that really bad call is the final straw. And they're like, I'm coming in for this call, but we start digging and start working on it. And it's not just this call. This call is just the top of a giant pile. And so we have to deal with the pile to get them better. So in answer to your question, I think that's what I see. I see both cumulative and single incident type traumas.
Okay. And then with that, when you start engaging them in their stories and their trauma, mm-hmm. Are you finding that there is also trauma back in their childhood as well?
Sometimes there is, and sometimes there's not. It just depends. But I think that when people have a history of pre-existing trauma, especially a history of pre-existing trauma that hasn't been treated, the healing hasn't taken place, it leaves a real vulnerability to the development of mental health conditions, major depressive disorder, anxiety disorders, PTSD, various problematic addictive behaviors are a downstream effect for some of that, such as porn addiction, sex addiction, chemical addiction, all kinds of things can be downstream effects.
Okay. And
I don't know if I answered your question. I'm sorry, Marty.
No, you did. Yeah. I mean, so you are seeing some with traumas from their past, their childhood and stuff before they get into the fire service or wherever they're serving. And then you get some that are just single incidents within the fire service or a cumulative effect from this fire service. So, in my knowledge base, with the peer support program is that's a program that is geared towards the recognition that these cumulative effects or these single moments can have some long-term ramifications. So if we can get to them soon, then hopefully they won't have that. If we could either, have them talk on the tailboard, as we call it, or in the cab before we get done with a call, then maybe they can digest that, what we've been through, and not have it wreak so much havoc in their life. So with that, I guess I would, it leads me to believe that in your line of work that you're going to be dealing with, because this is a relatively new program, so you're going to be dealing with the of people who have not had a long-term history of that kind of support.
Yeah, I think that's true in the fire service, and I think that's true in the general population as well. Our society does not do a good job helping people deal with the difficulty of life.
Yeah.
Right? And that includes the early childhood trauma. I mean, a lot of us are just walking wounded, and we don't know it until we can't function anymore. And then you go get help. And you're right. If you could go get help when you're 18, 19, 20, when you're first starting out in your adulthood, you're going to be in a much better position when you're 40 or 50, dealing with with the impact of life.
And that's important to note. So, I guess, and I'm wondering now. So we have these, and I'll just call them salty old dogs. These guys that have been in the fire service or law enforcement or military for a number of years who didn't have that kind of support network, and now we have some new guys that are coming in who. That's all they know is that kind of support. And so it'd be interesting over time to see if that hope, puts you out of work or the post-traumatic stress and these stressors become lesser and lesser.
Yes, I'm super excited about this. When I first came into working with various departments, with trying to, to level up their organizations or departments in terms of mental health, I was expecting the salty dog, the old salty dudes who are like, I don't want to be a pussy, no, don't be crying like a little girl, that whole thing.
Yes.
And are we seeing a lot of that? Oh yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. I'm good. There's nothing wrong with me. Like, if there's something wrong with somebody, it's their fault. Like, we still see a lot of that old suck it up buttercup kind of mentality.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited. It seems that there's this whole wave, it's a generational wave of people in their 20s to 30s that are 20s to 30s now. Their knowledge and self-awareness regarding their emotions and how to deal with emotions, the existence of emotions, they are so far ahead of the people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and older now. And I'm just so excited to see what happens as they start maturing in their careers, to see how the impact of that is going to be on the PTSD stats. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah. And so then would you say that their knowledge of that would create, I want to use emotional resilience, but resiliency takes having gone through something, right? But does having that knowledge, then going through something, does that lead to a greater emotional resiliency?
I think for me, what my idea of resiliency is having a skill set, right? It's like playing baseball, right? Yeah. If you stuck someone who's never even seen a baseball game or touched a glove or a bat out in the field and said, go play ball, be good, be good at this. I'm not going to do
right.
What are they going to do? They're going to suck, right? And so they're not going to be resilient baseball players. They're not going to be functional. They're not going to do a good job. And so I think your emotional world is the same, Marty. I think you need the tools, you need the skills, you need tactics that work. And then that'll help you figure out what's going on in here and what to do about it. And honestly, these tactics aren't rocket science. They're not that hard. It's just no one has been handed the ball and glove. And no one said, here, choke up on the bat, hold it like this, get the glove in front of your face. No one's ever taught people how to do anything with their emotions. And so they're completely incompetent, which makes them completely avoidant. Like, why would you want to deal with emotions if you don't even know what to do with them? So how can you be resilient? How can you be good at emotions? And how can you be good at fleshing out your emotional pipeline when some nasty trauma comes into it? How can you be good at that if you don't even know the tools? Like, you don't even know what to do about that. So to me, resiliency isn't so much, I think you can develop resiliency without having terrible things happen to you, in my opinion, by learning the skills, going to batting practice, like practicing these tools, using them, keeping yourself, your emotional world clean, and keeping your, I think of it as reps. You go to the gym, you get reps and your muscles get bigger, right?
Yeah. There's
emotional resiliency tools and tactics you can use. You can do reps on, even when you're not having a bad thing go on in your life, even when you don't have PTSD, so that you get that muscle mass built up in your emotional system, so to speak. And then when nasty things, horrible things, traumatic things are happening or you're exposed to them, you've already got your emotional muscle built up and you're ready to roll. To me, that's resilience. And that is just based on being exposed to how to handle this stuff, like what this stuff is and how to handle it, and practicing and doing the reps. So to me, that's resilience. I don't know that has so much to do with having had to go through terrible things to get there. I think you could do prevention work and develop resiliency too.
Yeah. And that's encouraging. And I love hearing that because, I think as men, we are doers. We want to have something to that we can grab onto that makes sense to us. So, this podcast is really centered around how do we raise boys so that when they become adults, and enter the fire service or law enforcement or whatever they do. I just talk about these because that's what I am immersed in. And that's where, we're seeing, I think that there's statistics like we're 5 times as likely to have PTSD than civilians, almost twice as many suicides in the fire department and law enforcement as there is in the general population. And so I kind of look at those as, all right, if we're going to raise the possible next generation of firefighters, law enforcement, military personnel, who are going to have these moments where they're exposed to stressors or critical incidents that the rest of the world isn't, and they are going to kill themselves at twice as high a rate, and they are going to have 5 times as likelihood to have PTSD. What do we do? So, so I love the idea that there are some things that we can be teaching our young boys now. And so, what are those things? I have ideas and thoughts, but I'd love to hear the thoughts of a doctor, peel back that onion a little bit.
Okay. I think I'm going to do a sales pitch for a book. I don't know the author. I'm getting nothing from it. There's no kickbacks. I just 100% believe in this book. It's called Running on Empty. It's by Dr. Jonice, Jonice, Webb, Webb. She's on Amazon.
Okay.
Dr. Webb has laid out this concept of emotional neglect. She's put her finger on something that the rest of the psychology field could kind of feel, but we didn't actually have a term for it. We hadn't really explored it. And emotional neglect is the underpinnings for lack of resilience, and for mental illness later in life. There's linkages between getting emotionally neglected in your childhood, on your outcomes later on for anxiety and other mental health conditions. Anyone who's been a child needs to read that book, and anyone who has children needs to read that book, because even good people, well-meaning people, nice people will neglect their children and emotionally. And there's certain ways of talking to them and interacting with them and dealing with the stressors of life with your children that can be emotionally neglectful, or it can be, spot on parenting, where you're providing the emotional foundation that your child needs to build strong emotional mental health down the road. So Running on Empty is it revolutionized my way of thinking and practicing in the world of trauma work. So I would definitely have people educate themselves about emotional neglect. You're probably doing it to your kids, and you don't even know you're doing it, and you don't even intend to be doing it. So that's something to be aware of. I think if we're going to be looking at how to help boys become mentally healthy men with resilience and the ability to bear up under repetitive, terrible, traumatic exposure, I think we, at minimum, have to challenge something in the male culture and in the regular American Caucasian culture as well, is this concept of strong versus weak. There's this head game that we play, gotta be strong. And that head game is absolutely psychologically crippling. It prevents people, it causes people to develop symptoms. It prevents people from getting the support that they need when they need it. And I see people in my practice who've been playing that I got to be strong, I can't look weak kind of game. I see them 30 years after of trauma exposure, police, law enforcement, fire service, they should have been getting help in their early 20s, right? But now it's accumulated to the point where they're massively suicidal, massively depressed, just PTSD off the chain. And a lot of it I lay at the feet of this I gotta be strong, can't look weak kind of game, that head game that men and people play, but men really play that game.
Oh yeah.
And it's unfortunate, Marty, because it's a word game. It's a word game problem. And honestly, I never really understood the word game thing. When I went to grad school, I really struggled with the word game thing. I'm going to tell you how they taught me about this word game thing. When I first started grad school, during my training to be a therapist, they said, you have got to let go of the ideas of good and bad, right? Like good people, bad people, good things, bad things, good symptoms, bad. So you have to let it go. And I'm like, some things are bad. Some things are just bad. And they're like, what you're doing there is not very helpful, right? If you're dealing with humans, you've got to let this good, bad concept go. And I just didn't get it. And so my teacher told a story, and it was something like, it's an old Chinese, like proverb type story, where there's this old farmer dude and he's got a horse and his horse runs off. Have you heard this one, Marty? His horse runs off, and it's the horse that pulls the plow. Like it's like the center of the farm, right? Horse runs off. And so all of his neighbors come over. Oh, that's so bad. I'm so sorry. And the Chinese dude's like, we'll see. And then, I don't know, a little while later, the horse comes back and he's got a lady with him and she's pregnant. And so like, he's got his old horse, he's got a new horse, and he's got a baby horse coming, right? And the neighbors are coming over. That's so good. That's awesome. And the farmer's like, well, we'll see. And then, the guy's right. His son, his heir, he helps on the farm, is riding the horse. Something happens. The horse bucks him off. The kid broke his leg pretty bad, right? And the neighbors come over. Oh, it's so bad. And we'll see. And then the military rolls into town and they draft everyone between the ages 16 and 25, right? And they take them all away. So this whole generation of young men are gone from the village. And the neighbors come by. Oh, you're so lucky. Your son broke his leg. He can't be drafted. And he's like, we'll see. And so at that point I was like, okay, I get. Stop telling the story. Teach. I got this. Good and bad is completely subjective. Right, the same way weak and strong is 100% subjective. In school, they suggested we look at it a little bit differently because good and bad's completely like an opinion, right? Who knows what's good and bad? Who knows what's weak and strong? It's pure opinion. Weak in one situation is strong in another, and vice versa. My teacher suggested thinking of set of good and bad is helpful, not helpful. Is what you're doing helpful, or is it not helpful? Is the way you're treating people helpful or not helpful? Is it getting you what you want to get, or is it getting in the way? And I like this idea of looking at things not as opinions, like not as like, oh, strong and weak. Oh, he's just a pussy. He's over there upset. He can't handle it.
Right.
Well, that's nothing but an opinion. Like that's just an opinion, and opinions are usually based on nothing, air, right? There's other ways to look at things other than strong and weak. And until we stop playing I have to appear strong and not appear weak, it's appearance management is really all that is. As long as we're more interested in our appearance than what's happening on the inside, we are fucked. Like you're going to end up at 50 suicidal and, pardon my French, am I allowed to curse on your show?
Yes.
Like, yeah, if you are more interested in your appearance and if that's the primary thing, that's your highest value, then you're going to end up PTSD, major depression, suicide.
Yes.
I mean, that's so dangerous. But if you're looking at, if like raising a son and you're looking at, he's upset about something and you're like, he's a whiny bitch. Why is he whining? That's appearance. Like that's appearance, right? Yeah. But the real thing is what's he upset about? Like, what's going on in him? Are his feelings hurt? Did someone insult him? Like, what's happening in there? So if you're having a son, I think my suggestion, at least the beginner suggestion, is educate yourself with Dr. Webb's book. Another one would be really be curious about what's happening inside your children, and don't be so judgmental about what they're allowed to feel or allowed to show. Don't, not this weak, strong, don't be a baby, don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about. That has to go. Like that's got to go. Pay attention to what they're feeling, pay attention to what's happening internally, and introduce that into the conversation. I think in our culture, we don't talk about emotions much, right? That's why people probably want to avoid going to therapy, because they know they're going to have to talk about emotions, and they've never in their life talked about them because we're not supposed to talk about them. And that is crippling. Talk about doing reps. Like if, you were talking about that resiliency reps, you're doing these things to help, and your muscles get bigger in a more helpful direction. If you're refusing to introduce the language, and if emotions are an off limits topic in your family, if you're not allowed to show emotions, you're not allowed to talk about emotions, you're not allowed to talk about the consequences of emotions, you're doing reps, but in the unhelpful direction. Like you're building psychological, I don't want to say weakness, that's the wrong word, because I'm not supposed to be using weak and strong, but you're introducing vulnerability into the system, vulnerability to future mental health issues. You're building vulnerable muscles. I'm stretching that metaphor as far as I can.
That's all right. So I just want to, because I am a dad and I have some boys who, one of them, I gotta be careful because they'll probably listen to this, right?
I know, be careful.
So we'll just say in general, there are some, we have boys out there that will be, it will appear that they are a little bit more whiny, a little bit more needy. They will be kind of play what I would call a victim role, like, oh, he's doing this, he's being mean to me, and, whine about the things that are being done instead of taking care of them. And as a father who's raising a boy that you want to be able to stand up for themselves and to be courageous and things, because I still think that those are valuable. What do you do, and what do you say to men who would say, well, yeah, I've got a whiny kid, or I've got this, what would you say to that?
I can't get it out of my head, so I'm just going to tell the story. I used to live on a cul-de-sac, and my next door neighbor on the cul-de-sac was a duplex. So it was a family. This whole big giant family was in this duplex. And on one side, that kid, I swear, he was a little criminal. Like, he's a criminal in the making. He was maybe 14 or so. He'd ride the bike around. He'd steal things. He'd break things. He was just a little thug, right? Like, in the making. Right?
Yeah.
And then the other kid on the other side, his dad was law enforcement here in Washington State. And the other kid was a sweet kid, couple years younger. He didn't have the muscle mass. He was a nice kid, right? A nice person. And there was a problem. I think they both done some yard work for me, and so I didn't have change. I gave $20 to one of them. I said, hey, break it and share that, 10 for each of you, right? I stupidly gave the 20 to the thug kid, right? I don't know why I wasn't thinking, right?
Yeah.
And so hours later, the whole family's at my door. Like, what's going on here? Because there was a problem, because the thug kid did not split that. He was keeping that money, right? He was keeping that money. And the other kid's he's going to his father, who's in law enforcement, to solve this, frankly, theft that's happening in the family and to get help for him. And the dad was just like, I want them to work it out themselves. This kid's got the thug has 20 pounds on this kid. He's a couple years older, and he's a little criminal and does not mind breaking the rules. This other kid is not in a position to physically dominate him.
Sure.
What's he going to do? And he has zero support from his family to solve this. He doesn't even have support from the law enforcement living in the house to solve this crime. Like, this kid's on his own. Of course he's going to look whiny. He can't solve the problem, and he's going to get help to solve the problem from the leadership in the home. And his dad ultimately refused. I'm just not getting involved. I'm letting them work it out. Which maybe if you had identical twins, right? Maybe that would work if you had identical twins, the same weight, the same height, the same whatever, you know? But when you got two different kids at two different levels, that's abandonment. Like, it's abandoning your child to say, oh no, you have to go deal with the your child criminals in your world, and you have to solve that problem. Because, you know, adults, if my neighbor stole something from me, I wouldn't go over there and posture and demand they get it. I'd call the police and they would get it back from me. Like,
yeah,
that's how our society works. So I guess I'm questioning this idea of trying to abandon children to solve their own struggles. And when that happens, they look whiny, because that's when you don't have power, you complain. That's
and what is it? And what is it teaching the kid when you don't step in for them? What message are you sending them?
Oh, you're worthless. You're not worth protecting, and your needs are not important, and you don't matter. And that, my friend, that little trifecta is the foundation of PTSD, major depression, and a lot of adult misery.
Okay.
Right?
And do they get a message sent that they're weak if they're not wanting to go over and confront this person? You know, if that kid doesn't go do it and his dad says, you know, you got to handle this yourself, and he's not willing to handle it himself, does that kid now feel viewed as weak?
I don't know. We'd have to ask the kid.
Okay.
If it were my kid, we'd be talking. Like, what's going on? Have you tried to talk to this guy? Yeah, he won't give it back. What did he say? You know, we would talk about all the nitty gritty details of what happened. And then, you feel like you can handle this? No, I can't handle it. He never listens to me. He beats me up 3 times a week. Like, he's not going to give it back to me. Like, I would find out what is all happening on the inside of my kid. And if my kid needs help, I would support him. Yeah. In the same way, you don't just go out and run a marathon the first day. If I went out to run a marathon today, I'd die. Like, I'd be laying in the dirt, right? But if I ran half a block, and then later a block, and then later half a block, you build up to it. I think the way you build strength, I hate to use that word. I think the way you build the kind of behavior and kind of attitude that you want in your child is you build up to it like you build up to running a marathon, right? You don't just say, go run the marathon, go beat up the thug. You know, that's not going to happen. And your kid's going to feel abandoned and then feel depressed about it and like alone in life.
Sure. But
you could offer ideas. You guys could bat around ideas. You could talk, how does this feel for you? And work through the emotional piece, run through some ideas. He can try the ideas. If they don't work, then you step in. Right? Okay. The same way, I think it worked. Don't it work? They teach you to try to solve this at the lowest level. And if you can't, you start climbing the chain.
Yes.
Right? So it's the same thing. Try to solve it, kid. Kid, try to solve this problem. If you're having trouble, come back to me. And support the kid, because you're not trying to get him to be Joe Badass in this situation. You're trying to get him to have a cumulative accumulation of learning experiences across his childhood, so that he could be an effective adult, right? And I don't know if I'm making my point well on this, but
no, it's hitting home. If I could summarize, you know, what we've been talking about a little bit, or this moment, is that it sounds like to give our children, our boys, the best chance, we have to be curious about their emotions, curious about what's going on in their life, help them, guide them through these situations so that they feel supported, and that it gives them some reps in that will help build their resiliency factors, and that will produce and I'm going to use strong because I think it lands well, but that's going to develop maybe the most well-rounded man who is capable and controlled and able to deal with emotions at the same time. So then when you become one of these jobs we were talking about, firefighter, law enforcement, military, that you are able to deal with those things that are coming at you. So, I see it seems like we're battling in our culture somewhat of this. On one hand, you've got men saying, I want to raise this just this badass kid, right? This really strong dude. But what it comes out as is, and I don't think masculinity is toxic, but I do think that there is a toxic man out there. And I think that is what, on one side of the spectrum, we are saying that is the quintessential man. And quite frankly, it is toxic. Because now you can't deal with these emotions like you're talking. Now you're harming people. You're not caring for people. You are not giving space for people. But then on the other side, I think that they swing really wide the other way, and they say, well, basically we want to develop these men that are more feminine really than they are masculine. And that seems to be a detriment as well. So to take the long way around the barn here with my idea is that we acknowledge that we want to raise a capable young man, but we also want them to be, and in order to do that, we have to acknowledge their emotions. We have to acknowledge that there is going to be pain and hurt, because if we ignore it, it's still going to be there, right? I mean,
right, it's not going away.
Right. And so that now you're building a house, you're building a young man on sinking sand. And we all know that if you build anything on shifting sand, it's going to crumble at some time. It's going to come down. So to get all the way around this barn, we want to build a solid foundation, which is built upon really an entire man or boy, and their and emotions are going to be in there. I mean, we can't. I mean, I'm 44 years old, who doesn't have control of his emotions sometimes, can be quick to anger, and I'm trying to teach my 9 and 12-year-old boy emotional control, and I get angry with them, quick to anger with them when they aren't controlling their emotions, so it's super backwards, but that's
very normal, very common.
Very common, right? So, I like that. And so, really quick, I just want to talk about just a few things that we can leave some men with here is when we talk about building those emotional reps. Some things that we teach the guys at the firehouse are, we want, eating well, moving well, so lifting weights, things like that, thinking and breathing well, so getting your mind right, some things we can do, and sleeping well. And those are some things that men can do to just get their body and their mind in the right place. And then when we start talking about some things that people can use, well, if you're having a tough time, talk with somebody.
Yeah.
And then as men, we have to do the hard thing, right? And listen and guide our boys through that and not shove aside their emotions. And some other things that I think about with my boys is walking them through scenarios of, that they may encounter at school, which is going to be, the biggest, they're going to have the most interactions, right? Most time opportunities for conflict resolution. So walking them through scenarios, if somebody calls you a wuss, or somebody calls you an idiot, or somebody pushes you, or all of these things, right? And walk them through those scenarios so that in those moments they feel at least somewhat prepared, and then they have a person they can come back and talk to. Does that sound? How does that sound?
I really like that. And because it reminds me of that concept you mentioned earlier about building a foundation on bedrock, not sand. And there's shitty things in the world, like shitty things. Kids are jerks, right? They're so mean to each other. And adults are too, right? Let's be real. we're all going to face really unpleasant things in life. But those things are so much easier to bounce back from and recover from if you have a solid foundation and a solid group of people that you know has your back, right? You know they're going to listen to you when you're down. You know they're going to offer you suggestions if you ask for them. They're going to help you try to solve your problems. You know you're not alone, right?
Yeah.
And we do not want to leave the children feeling alone with their problems, right? It's easy to prey on a child who feels alone, right? So we want to be that person that your kid feels safe and comfortable coming to say, I'm struggling with this thing. This person at school is doing blah, blah, blah. I don't know what to do about it. Or my teacher is doing blah, blah, blah. If you can be the person that your kid wants to go to for advice and wants to talk things through with, and feels like if your kid feels like you get them and you know what's happening on the inside and you're willing to hear what's happening on the inside, they feel safe. And that is the foundation you want to build a child on, a safe child. And that positions them up so much better for the rest of their lives. So I think I agree with you on building the foundation with safety and support.
Yeah. So that safety. Yeah. That I like that because they're safe to explore the wholeness of who they are. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can go try things, right? If my neighbors, if his dad had said, okay, this does suck. I had a situation like this a number of times when I was a kid. Here's some things that I tried. Why don't you go try those and you see if if you know your dad's going to work it through with you and talk to you and be like, yeah, I've been there, done that, man. That's hard. You're right. It is hard. Let's see what we can do about it. That kid knows that this guy's got me, and even if it goes real bad, I can still have a place to come home to in my heart. Right. Unfortunately, so many parents, the old school parenting is totally neglects the inside stuff. Jonice Webb, Running on Empty, we'll talk all about that. It neglects it. And so the kid just feels alone and unsafe and doesn't know how to face life. And that's building, again, that's doing reps in the vulnerable direction. So I like your idea of building a foundation with safety. Yeah.
Well, I think, this might be a good place to wrap up. I mean, gosh, there's so many, my mind is swirling with all these questions and things that I have, programming, meaning what are some programs that we can offer boys? What are some things that we should be providing, whether it's at school or in the household, and you've touched on some of those things. But maybe, do you have a couple? Yeah.
I do have something. It's another reference, but there's a man named Marshall Rosenberg. He's no longer with us. I believe he's passed on, but he left behind a stunning gift, a legacy of a stunning gift to humanity. He wrote a book called Nonviolent Communication. Okay. And it's a whole style of interacting with other people that is deeply respectful of who they are and what's on the inside of them. And deeply connecting the speakers. And when I participate in communications that are, follow the guidelines of Dr. Rosenberg, I've never felt a more satisfying or safe conversation. I never felt as much like that person who's listening to me really gets me, right? Oh my God, those are great conversations. And it's not that hard. It takes practice. It's like this, the instructions are simple, but to develop it and get skill with it, it takes a lot of reps, right? But the nonviolent communication is a worldwide network at this point. And in most major cities, they have a organization. They do trainings. There's practice groups where people can practice. We have one, I think it's in Everett here in Washington State, but every state I've lived in, within a 2-hour drive, there was an NVC training facility. And they do outreach, and they're always looking for opportunities to partner, to teach how to interact with other humans in a way that's not dominating or aggressive or toxic. It's non-toxic communication is what it is. And so if you were wanting to develop programming, I would get with those people. They've already got that figured out, and you could do collaborations with them. They're amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, man, there's questions abound. I listened to and have read books by Jason Wilson, who is he's written a book called Battle Cry. Really awesome. He has this Cave of Adullam. He's training these inner city boys in martial arts, and and it's important to me that my kids are capable. So I teach my kids to fight. I think that there are moments for that.
Sure,
and I hear what you're saying there. And so, I guess my question to you is, I just want to make it clear that when you're offering this, nonviolent confrontation, but there's also a place for a violent confrontation, correct?
Oh, yeah. It's nonviolent communication.
Oh, communication.
Like nonviolent interactions.
Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to kick ass. Sometimes you have to go to war. Like sometimes people have to be punched in the face, right? Like that has to happen. But I think we go to that as our first option.
Yes.
When it should not be the first option. It should be the option of last resort, right?
Yes.
But we go there first. And it's because we have not been trained in skills and tactics to do anything different. It's all we know. It's our most animalistic. It's the animal in us. And we haven't used our big fancy brains to build any layers of other options on top.
Yes.
So I suggest we use our big fancy brains to come up with a menu of responses where violence is one of the responses. I think it's needed, right?
Yeah.
I grew up redneck, and there are some people who the only option is you got to fight, right?
Yeah.
It's just what has to happen. But again, it should not be the first option.
Yes. And I agree. And, there's and hopefully I'm not knocking him down a couple of bars, but I think it's Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, who has written a number of books. And, he uses the analogy of sheepdog and wolves, and a lot of times these toxic men that people are talking about are these wolves that are preying on the sheep, the weak who are alone by themselves. And there are going to be sheep out there, right? There are going to be people who just really aren't prone to aggression, who steer away from confrontation. Obviously we want them to be emotionally resilient so they can handle that, right? But for those who are capable, he says, these sheepdogs who are prone to aggression but have that control, right? And they're there to protect the sheep and stand in. So, that's kind of what I teach my boys. I teach my daughter the same thing, actually, but especially my boys, is that, my idea is that they walk up to a confrontation, somebody's about ready to get in a fight. There's statistics say that I think it's 57% of the time within 10 seconds, a bullying situation will start with somebody just walking up and saying stop. But a lot of times people are scared to go up and say stop because they feel they don't have the capabilities to actually intervene and stop if something were to happen. So, teaching them that. So anyways, a sheepdog goes up and says stop. Hopefully it stops. But if it doesn't, then in my mind, you train these kids to fight. So they're capable of handling themselves, and that capability will give them some, their competency gives them the courage and to do it. But to go up there, I use, some biblical stuff in that, how to deal with those is that you go up and you try to handle something on your own. Say, hey, let's stop this here. If that doesn't work, you tell a friend, and you bring them in, and if that doesn't work, then you tell somebody higher up. Anyways, I like that notion of the sheepdog because I think it brings in what you're talking about, that emotional side, and also the strength and the reality that something may go down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the idea of being prepared for whatever, right? And so, you totally want to be physically prepared for whatever. And you also want to be mentally prepared and emotionally prepared and socially, interconnectivity. We need to be prepared across the board to be truly effective and have options. So I agree with you. I think you need to have it all to have a good mental existence.
Well, Cheryl, I appreciate you so much. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot. I think we should plan on someday having another one, because I will have more questions. If I have to, if I have to beg or buy you coffee, I will do that. You just let me know. But
not necessarily.
but you're awesome, and I don't want you to leave without knowing that you have helped and saved the lives of a lot of guys that I know. And the ripple effect of what you're doing is profound for their kids and their wives, and as they're raising them, because anyways, you are amazing, and I'm thankful for you.
Thank you for that recognition. It's nice to hear the acknowledgement. Thank you so much, Marty.
Yeah. Well, have a good day, and it's going to be a hot one.
Yeah, I know. Brace yourself.
All right.
Take care.
You
Bye,
too.
Marty.
Bye.